Sometimes, due to imperfect legislation or simple human negligence, terrible things can happen. The realities of life show that many criminals could have been stopped before they caused harm. However, unfortunately, fortune sometimes smiles upon them. This bloody massacre in France is hard to explain otherwise. Today we will talk about the events that shook the Savinol College, a prestigious private educational institution, a kind of boarding middle school, located in Chambon-Sur-Lignon, in the department of Haute-Loire. Here, children not only study but also permanently reside, separated from their parents. Chambon-Sur-Lignon itself is a small commune with about 2,000 inhabitants. Savinol College was the most prominent object in this area. The majority of local residents were somehow connected with it, either they studied here or worked. The educational institution, opened back in 1938, had managed to accumulate a solid history during its entire existence. But never before had it been as bloody as in 2011. This year brought many shocks that played their role and ended in tragedy. In 2011, Savinol College was experiencing serious financial difficulties and was on the verge of bankruptcy. The management was trying with all their might to keep the institution afloat. And this made sense because, despite all the troubles, it was the most famous educational institution in the district. The college worked under an association agreement with the state, but the situation was extremely shaky. There were fewer and fewer students, and there was a catastrophic lack of money. Against this background, the cost of educational services decreased, and the college accepted almost everyone without paying attention to academic performance and resumes. Students found themselves as if suspended in the air. In fact, they risked never completing their studies. This affected all categories of schoolchildren and caused a lot of fuss and discontent on the part of families. It was during this crisis situation, shortly before the tragic denouement, that 13-year-old Agnes Marin was transferred to Savinol College. Her parents, Frédéric and Paula, believed that the previous school in Paris had a bad influence on the teenager. There, Agnes got involved with the wrong crowd, which negatively affected her behavior. Teachers caught her smoking weed in the schoolyard. Several times the girl skipped classes to hang out with friends. The teachers criticized Agnes's behavior, and her school report was far from ideal. Although at the same time, the girl had good grades in all subjects. She was a conscious teenager, strived to get an education, and dreamed of building a career as a director. Therefore, her mother and father considered it necessary to keep their daughter away from bad influence. It was against this background that the parents decided to apply for Agnes's admission to Savinol College. Despite her bad behavior and transfer, the girl had a good relationship with her family. Frédéric and Paula believed that studying at this institution would benefit Agnes. With the change of school, the girl had to adapt to the class again. In addition, there were some differences in the profile program, so it was necessary to pay more attention to studies. However, for the clever Agnes, who always had good academic performance, this did not become a problem. At this time, her parents worked in the suburbs of Paris and visited their daughter every 3 weeks. Agnes was a pleasant, cute, kind, and cheerful girl. She easily got along with people, so she effortlessly blended into the new team and made friends. Here, too, she was noticed with a cigarette in various places, but few people were bothered by this. In the new school, this was not considered a problem. Smoking wherever one pleased became a common practice in the new school, and the teachers seemed unconcerned whether these were just cigarettes or something stronger. The campus of Savinol College, surrounded by forest, occupied a large territory. After classes ended in the afternoon, students usually had free time, which they spent together, having fun and walking around the neighborhood. For the most part, teenagers were left to their own devices. In the absence of proper supervision, many abused this freedom. On November 16, 2011, after having lunch in the cafeteria after classes, the students, as usual, gathered and went for a walk to the center of Chambon-Sur-Lignon. It was about a 15-minute walk from the campus to the city. Agnes was also in the company of friends. They were supposed to return at 4:30 p.m. When the time came, the students began to gather at the campus, some with a slight delay. But Agnes was not among them. The girl belonged to the younger students, so the management felt a special responsibility for her. The disappearance was immediately reported to the teachers, and they, without thinking for long, turned to the police. After the gendarmes arrived on campus, several search groups were formed from among the students, teachers, and law enforcement officers. They all went to comb the city and the surroundings in the hope of finding the missing girl. But by midnight, when it was already quite dark, they had to return. It was time for the students to prepare for the next school day. Unfortunately, neither Agnes nor even any traces of her were found. The gendarmes continued the search, but also without success. Detectives began questioning students from the girl's inner circle. Finally, a friend of the missing girl named Estelle approached them. She had seen Agnes on the day of her disappearance. According to her, the girls met and walked together on the main square in the city center, and around 2:30 p.m. they parted ways. Estelle did not see her friend anymore. Although she herself studied in another school, she regularly met and communicated with Agnes. Such meetings were a common thing for them and, it would seem, nothing unusual happened that day. However, when the gendarmes spoke with Estelle again the next day, November 17th, her story suddenly changed. Now the friend claimed that during the walk around the city, Agnes twisted her ankle, which caused them to linger on the square. However, Estelle herself could not stay with her, because she was in a hurry to go home, where her parents were waiting for her. And Agnes seemingly did not ask for it either. On the contrary, it seemed that the missing girl was going to meet some young man and her friend's company was superfluous. So Estelle just left, having agreed on the next meeting. This story seemed dubious to the police. Estelle's lie seemed somehow strange and unmotivated. It was unclear why she did not immediately mention that guy, because he could have become an important clue in the investigation. Catching on to this information, the officers tried to question the friend in more detail. But to no avail. Estelle admitted that she had to lie because Agnes was supposedly going to do something bad and asked not to give out any information about her. This seemed even stranger. Why cover for a missing girl? There was an assumption that Agnes could have simply run away from school due to some problems. Eventually, Estelle herself fell under suspicion because of her insincerity. Her alibi was carefully checked. Fortunately for the girl, her words were quickly confirmed. Indeed, after meeting with her friend, she went straight home, and acquaintances saw her on the way. Moreover, on the day of Agnes's disappearance, the girls actively corresponded, arranging a meeting for tomorrow. True, the missing girl did it from a mobile phone, which later, by all appearances, she turned off. At least, after a certain point, no one could reach her anymore. Estelle assumed that Agnes's battery had simply run out. Well, or she ran away from school, because she had wanted to do it for a long time and openly said that she did not like it here. This version seemed more and more plausible to the investigators. Trying to determine in which direction it was worth looking for the girl, the investigators carefully studied her correspondence. And suddenly they came across mentions of the same young man with whom Agnes had allegedly planned to meet on the day of her disappearance. It turned out to be a high school student named Matthieu Moulinos, who was 17 at the time. He could definitely possess valuable information, so he immediately attracted the close attention of the gendarmes. During the first meeting with Matthieu, the police noticed fresh scratches on his hands and face. Moreover, as confirmed by classmates, these marks appeared on the very day of Agnes's disappearance. However, the guy himself claimed that he fell into blackberry bushes and got scratched because he drank too much while the whole school was walking around the city. To verify this story, the gendarmes talked to other students. They confirmed that they had heard such an explanation from Matthieu himself, but few believed him. According to eyewitnesses, around 5 p.m., when the rest of the students had already returned from the walk, Moulinos suddenly came out of the forest near the campus. Everyone was surprised by this, no one understood what he was doing there. When asked about this, Matthieu reacted surprisingly nervously and aggressively, which only increased suspicions. However, the gendarmes were in no hurry to draw conclusions and decided to first gather more information about the main suspect. Matthieu Moulinos was originally from Chambon-Sur-Lignon and had 2 younger sisters. At school, the guy kept to himself and seemed eccentric. He wore Gothic-style clothing, openly propagated a rebellious way of life, disobedience to parents and teachers. In high school, he more than once boasted about his hacking skills and the use of illegal substances. Matthieu was secretive, unsociable, and had problems with socialization. In order to get while still a schoolboy, he began to rob pharmacies. The guy's performance was so low that he was almost suspended from classes twice. The most innocent of his sins was the regular consumption of including from computers at school. The young man's behavior was clearly going downhill, and conflicts with the law were not long in coming. Against this background, Matthieu's involvement in Agnes's disappearance seemed quite likely. He became the main suspect because of his strange behavior. Many called him a guy with peculiarities. Matthieu started studying at the Savinol School in November 2010. The guy regularly visited his relatives in Chambon-Sur-Lignon, where his family lived. In addition, the high school student had a girlfriend from among the college students. The young people often spent their holidays together in the south of France. Matthieu was fond of video games, liked to smoke, experimented with other psychoactive substances. Alcohol was also not alien to him. The young man regularly drank and even brought alcohol to the educational institution. Many noted that when drunk, Matthieu lost the ability to behave adequately. But despite all this, he did not hang out with openly criminal individuals or any bad companies. Perhaps he was just experiencing teenage years more acutely, but let's get back to the investigation. Matthieu's suspicious behavior did not go unnoticed by the gendarmes. They immediately suspected that the guy was hiding something in his answers to questions. Therefore, they decided to talk to him in more detail, gradually approaching the topic of Agnes's disappearance. The young man admitted that he had seen the girl the day before her disappearance, but allegedly it was an accidental meeting in the corridors of the campus. Allegedly, they just greeted each other, passing by each other, but did not communicate. Matthieu himself was supposedly going on a date with his girlfriend that day. Despite his seeming conviction, he categorically denied any involvement in the schoolgirl's disappearance. But the investigators decided to play it safe and still took the suspect into custody until all the circumstances were clarified. By this time, Agnes's parents had already arrived in the city. They started their own search for their daughter, talked to journalists, posted leaflets with a photo of the missing girl. Frederick and Paula talked to many passers-by on the streets, but, unfortunately, they could not find out anything significant. In their opinion, despite some behavioral problems lately, Agnes was not at all prone to such sudden escapes. On the contrary, she had always been a homebody and would never have run away just like that. Unless she would have agreed to go for a walk somewhere with friends, nothing more. And even then, if she had really just run away, she would have had to leave some traces. She would certainly have been recorded by video surveillance cameras at the exits from the city. Or at least some random witnesses could have remembered and recognized the girl. But for some reason, she remained completely unnoticed by others. Unfortunately, all search efforts so far have been in vain. But the public was increasingly interested in this case. The gendarmes were actively working, talking to all possible witnesses, the inner circle, and friends of the missing schoolgirl. While Matthieu was in custody, the gendarmes searched his dormitory room. There they found suspiciously dirty clothes, the same ones that witnesses saw the guy wearing when he came out of the forest on the day of Agnes's disappearance. Matthieu explained the dirt stains and scratches on his body by falling into blackberry bushes. But to the police, these marks looked more like the consequences of a fight. The suspect's belongings were sent for examination. During the second interrogation, Matthieu began to get confused in his testimony. At first, he admitted that he had met with Agnes on the day of her disappearance. Allegedly, they went together to the forest to look for hallucinogenic mushrooms, found them, and took them. Matthieu also smoked, so he completely lost control, fell into the bushes, and dropped out of reality. And when he came to his senses, Agnes was no longer there. He said he tried to find her, but to no avail, so he just returned to the campus by himself. However, this version did not stand up to verification. Analysis of Matthieu's blood did not reveal any traces of mushrooms. The guy was openly lying. Then he began to add new details again. Allegedly, Agnes also fell into the bushes with him, and then he remembered nothing until his return to college. Matthieu's lawyer even offered to take the investigators to that place in the forest and show everything, but the suspect refused. Then the police decided to independently inspect the area of the forest that Matthieu was talking about. A large-scale search involving dogs, divers, and even helicopters brought a terrible result. The missing girl was found, dead, with obvious signs of violence. This came as a real shock to the investigators, who until the last moment hoped to find Agnes alive. Her parents were immediately informed about the horrific outcome of the search. The body was sent for an autopsy. Now it remained only to get a confession from Matthieu. However, stunned by the discovery, he surrendered almost immediately. It turned out that the teenager lured Agnes into the forest, where he brutally dealt with her. After committing the crime, Matthieu tried to burn the victim's clothes and body, hoping to destroy traces of the crime. Fortunately, he did not succeed. As it turned out, the murder weapon was Matthieu's childhood toy, a yo-yo, with which he never parted. It was this that the teenager used to immobilize the victim. Agnes desperately fought back, managed to scratch the attacker's face and hands. But he, being much older and stronger, quickly overcame the girl. A chilling detail, during interrogations. Matthieu carelessly played with the same yo-yo with which he tied the hands of his victim. As if boasting about what he had done, the autopsy revealed even more alarming details of this brutal attack. Before killing Agnes, the rapist methodically tortured her. He broke her left arm, both shins, and inflicted numerous blows. And after the abuse, he cold-bloodedly inflicted 17 knife wounds on the girl's chest and face. Traces of a desperate struggle were found on her body. Particles of the killer's skin remained under her nails, whom Agnes trusted because of her naivety and youth. There was no doubt left. Matthieu fully admitted his guilt. Agnes was buried in Paris on November 26, 2011, on the day when she was supposed to turn only 14. Hundreds of concerned people who came to support the family of the deceased at this terrible moment were present at the farewell ceremony. But, as it soon became clear, she was not Matthieu's first victim. In August 2010, the police were already investigating this scumbag's attack on another girl, his 15-year-old neighbor Julie from the town of Gare. The young man had been pretending to be her friend for a long time, although in fact he had much more sinister intentions. One day, while returning 10 euros borrowed by Julie, he lured her into the forest. There, clearly preparing for the crime in advance. The guy tightly tied the victim to a tree with shoelaces. And then he brutally raped the defenseless girl. According to Julie, she miraculously survived, and only thanks to her mother, who literally sensed the danger to her daughter and called her at that very fateful moment. Hearing the call, the embarrassed Matthieu released the exhausted victim and fled. Traumatized but alive, Julie told the police everything. The was detained. During the interrogation, he shed crocodile tears, trying to soften the hearts of the investigators. But the girl had no doubts. If not for a lucky chance, she would have inevitably become the first killed by this monster. Despite the seriousness of the attack on Julie, Matthieu did not receive the deserved punishment then. He spent 4 months in a pre-trial detention center, where psychiatrists worked with him. In the end, one of them recognized the young man as completely rehabilitated and safe for society. Based on this conclusion and under pressure from Matthieu's family, the judge released him. The only conditions were a course of psychotherapy and a ban on living in his home region. To arrange their son in a new school, Matthieu's parents traveled around 24 educational institutions. And they received as many refusals. Until they found a place in the same college where Agnes soon entered. A very strange decision by the administration is to agree to accept a student with such a dangerous background to a school where the majority are girls aged 13 to 17. Obviously, the management was not too interested in the problematic teenager's past. And they were terribly mistaken in their assessments. The college principal assured the court that he had no right to delve into the student's past. And that he had allegedly not received any warnings from law enforcement about Matthieu. However, it soon became clear, in fact, the head knew about the guy's problems, but did not delve too much into the details. The young criminal's father personally convinced the principal that everything was fine with his son. Allegedly, the former troubles were only associated with an unsuccessful breakup with a girl who decided to take revenge and accuse Matthieu of. The principal believed this tale. Thus, the pervert's father deliberately lied for the sake of his son's admission to college, and this lie eventually led to the brutal murder of Agnes. The investigators concluded that the enrollment of a potentially dangerous student in the graduating class was dictated solely by financial considerations. At that time, the college was experiencing difficulties and desperately needed funds. And for each pupil, the state allocated €13,000 per year. So the institution's management was not too worried about who would study there. The main thing is that the places are filled. It's hard to believe, but this is the reality. The trial of Matthieu was accompanied by considerable controversy and stirred up the public. The killer's mother and father, the college administration, representatives of the law, all found themselves under tremendous pressure. According to French laws, minors who have committed serious crimes must be tried behind closed doors. But Agnes's relatives insisted on the partial openness of the sessions. They wanted journalists to be present at key stages. This would help draw society's attention to the problem and find out who was really to blame for the tragedy. At the time of the murder, Matthieu had just turned 17. There was a little more than a month left before the age of majority. But the law is the law, and the lawyers had every right to demand a closed process. In the end, this is what happened. The relatives of Agnes were denied partially open hearings. A separate story is with the psychiatrist who, after Matthieu's first attack on a girl, recognized him as cured and safe. It later turned out that she had no experience working with either criminals or sexual violence at all. In fact, she was a beginner who did not have the proper qualifications to evaluate such cases. Other psychiatrists involved in Matthieu's examination noted his strange, inadequate behavior. It seemed that he was not at all aware of reality, did not feel guilty for what he had done. The guy practically did not react to the specialist's attempts to get through to him, but often allowed himself aggressive attacks and even threats against them. Matthieu's outbursts of anger arose out of nowhere. For no apparent reason, it seemed that Matthieu was completely devoid of sympathy or remorse. He himself admitted it. According to the young criminal, he had repeatedly felt some inner impulse that pushed him to villainy. The first girl became a victim of just such an impulse. And then the same fate befell little Agnes. After committing the murder, Matthieu finally underwent a full psychiatric examination. He was diagnosed with paranoid and schizoid disorder. Doctors considered the guy extremely dangerous to society, but at the same time sane and able to stand trial. Given the defendant's minor age at the time of the crime, he was to be tried according to somewhat milder norms. But in the end, due to the particular cruelty of the act, it was decided to consider the case according to adult laws. On June 28, 2013, the court passed a verdict. For the rape and assault on Julie, as well as the rape and murder of Agnes, Matthieu was sentenced to life imprisonment. This was only the second case in the history of French justice when a minor received the highest measure of punishment. The criminal's lawyer categorically disagreed with this decision. He insisted that his client needed proper treatment first of all, not prison. The diagnosis of psychiatrists clearly indicated a disease. So the defender filed an appeal. In September 2014, a retrial of the case was to take place. For the relatives of the deceased Agnes, this process became even more painful, largely due to the killer's shocking behavior. This time Matthieu was much more talkative and self-confident. Each of his words seemed to mock the suffering of the family, who were forced to relive all that horror again. It seemed that the defendant was simply enjoying the situation, savoring the horrific details. Matthieu openly admitted that he had always loved to see other people's pain. And that after the massacre of Agnes, he was in a state of euphoria for a long time, feeling an irresistible craving for similar crimes. It became obvious, if he had not been detained in time, he would have killed again. Hearing this, the jury left the verdict unchanged. The lawyer filed another appeal regarding the excessive severity of the punishment. But it was also rejected. But the case did not end there. On February 7, 2014, Agnes's parents filed a complaint against the state for criminal negligence. They were convinced that the attack on their daughter became possible precisely because of the mistakes of the system, psychiatrists, judges, officials. Because of their fatal miscalculations, a dangerous criminal ended up at large, and then none of those responsible were even punished. The Supreme Court of Paris supported the family's position. For the negligence that led to the tragedy, they were awarded compensation in the amount of €185,000. However, for the parents, the goal was not money at all. With this lawsuit, they sought to demonstrate the imperfection of the entire French law enforcement system, and influence its reform. Meanwhile, Savinol College, shaken by the scandal surrounding Matthieu, finally went bankrupt and closed in 2014. The position of the killer's family from the very beginning was extremely unenviable. After all, at the time of his crime, they bore full responsibility for Matthieu. In addition, facts were revealed that it was the father who made every effort to justify his son and arrange for a new school. So this family also came under harsh public condemnation and pressure. The public was convinced that the tragedy occurred due to the perpetrator's indulgence on the part of his parents. Instead of taking care of the forced therapy of their son in a specialized psychiatric institution and ensuring proper control over the teenager who was released from custody, the mother and father simply sent him away from home to a school where, in fact, there was no one to supervise him. Therefore, according to society, the parents bear indirect responsibility for the murder committed. However, some considered this case rather an exception. Matthieu suffered from a mental disorder, and his parents desperately tried to help the child, socialize him and integrate him into society, not suspecting the real danger he posed. At least, that's what the parents themselves claimed on all media platforms available to them. They appeared on almost every popular TV channel in France, using all possible media. Matthieu's mother and father even published a book about their family's life, in which they said that their son still feels no remorse for what he did. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.